Welcome back to the deep dive. I'm going to be completely honest with you right out of the gate. Usually we kind of ease into these topics, right? We test the water.
Yeah, dip a toe in.
Exactly. But today, we are jumping straight into a volcano. We've got a text in front of us that is, well, it's heavy.
It is definitely not for the faint of heart.
No, it's high stakes, it's highly controversial, and, if you look at the data we are about to unpack, it is honestly a little terrifying.
We are going incredibly deep today.
We really are. But hey, before we get into the weeds, I need you to do me a massive favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to the show.
It really helps us keep the lights on.
It does, so we can keep bringing you these deep dives. And listen, I'm going to be very direct with you. If what we talk about today hits home, if you feel that itch in the back of your brain that the system is just broken, you need to go to Amazon Kindle or Google Playbooks and buy this ebook immediately.
Yeah, because we can only scratch the surface here.
Right, and you are going to want the full blueprint. The book is an ultra-long, incisive, and honestly fascinating review.
It's titled Loneliness for Gen Z, Disconnection from Self, No God, No Church by Conrad Riker.
And just to set the stage for you, Riker isn't writing your standard, clean your room kind of self-help book.
No, not at all. He actually positions this text as ammunition. It is a scorched earth analysis.
And it has a very specific target audience, right?
Yeah, very specific. It's written for men's rights activists,
Yeah.
the red-pilled manosphere, and really any guy who feels like the deck is entirely stacked against him.
Right, and it's dense. I mean, it is incredibly long
Yeah.
because he is trying to document what he sees as the collapse of an entire social order.
He literally calls it a rescue mission.
A rescue mission. Okay, so the core premise here, and we should remind you that we are just reporting what's in the text, not endorsing it. The premise is that we are living in a gynocracy.
Yes, which is obviously a heavily loaded term.
Right, so break that down for us. What does Riker mean by gynocracy?
Well, he defines it as a society that is fundamentally ruled by female-centric imperatives.
Okay.
He argues that the major institutions, we're talking legal, educational, corporate,
Yeah.
have been captured.
Captured, not just influenced.
Right, captured. Before this alleged capture, these were institutions built by men. Now, Riker argues they have been taken over by feminist and Marxist ideologies.
And he claims these ideologies are actively hostile to the male experience.
Exactly. The mission of this deep dive is to trace that history, according to his text, to understand how we got from point A to point B.
So we're looking at what he calls biological sabotage, legal erasure, and economic warfare.
Systemic and deliberate mechanisms designed to dismantle men.
Let's test that claim. Because engineered implies a mechanism, like you said, and Riker starts at the most fundamental level possible, which is biology.
The biological foundation, yeah.
He opens with these stats on a testosterone crisis that, I'm not gonna lie, completely blew my mind.
The numbers are staggering. He cites the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology, noting that testosterone levels in men under 35 have dropped about 20% in just 2 decades.
20%. I mean, that isn't a margin of error. That is a biological collapse.
It really is. To put that in perspective for you, a 25-year-old man today has the hormone profile of a 60-year-old man from the 1980s.
That is wild. And Riker is very clear that this isn't just about guys, playing too many video games.
No, he points directly to environmental poisoning.
This is where we get into the endocrine disruptors, right?
Correct. He breaks down the chemical assault. We are talking about BPA in receipts.
Yeah.
Literally the thermal paper you touch at the grocery store.
Wait, just touching a receipt?
Yes, the text claims it absorbs through the skin. That and phthalates in plastics. These are what he calls xenoestrogens.
Xenoestrogens, meaning they mimic estrogen in the male body.
They bind to the receptors. Your body thinks it's receiving estrogen, which then suppresses your natural testosterone production.
Okay, but he saves his biggest ammunition for the diet. He goes really hard on the soy boy phenomenon.
He treats it as a serious dietary hazard.
Because online, that's usually just thrown around as an insult.
Right. But Riker treats it as a medical reality. He discusses soy isoflavones binding to those same estrogen receptors.
He has that case study, right? The bodybuilder.
Yes, someone who should logically be at the peak of physical masculinity. He switched to soy protein, and within 8 months, according to the book, he developed gynecomastia.
Which is breast tissue growth in a man.
Effectively chemical castration. There's another specific anecdote in the book about a 24-year-old guy at the gym.
Oh, right, the one with the testosterone levels of a nursing home patient.
Exactly. Riker describes him as crying, having zero libido, deeply depressed, a total physiological breakdown.
And Riker's argument is that this physiological change makes men docile.
That's the why in his theory. If you lower testosterone, you lower aggression, you lower the drive to dominate or question authority.
So you get a compliant population.
Right. Riker argues that a society run by a gynocracy wants men to be less dangerous.
Which transitions perfectly into where this conditioning really takes root. We move from the body to the mind. Segment 1 continues with what he calls classroom castration.
This is a major focal point in the text. If the biology makes you weak, the school system makes you obedient.
He actually calls schools re-education camps.
He argues they are designed to pathologize normal male behavior.
You see this with the discipline stats he quotes, like, boys receive 70% of suspensions.
And look at the medication rates. He cites that 80% of Ritalin and ADHD prescriptions go to boys.
80%. That is a massive disparity. It's almost like being a boy is treated as a pre-existing condition.
That's exactly his point. Riker argues that traits which historically built civilization, risk-taking, high-energy competitiveness, are now labeled as disorders.
Because they're in a classroom setting that values sitting completely still for 6 hours straight.
So we are, in his words, drugging the boy out of the boy, creating a purpose vacuum.
And he claims this teaches boys that their innate programming is toxic.
Yes, psychological damage from day one.
Okay, so then these boys grow up. If they make it through the meds and the suspensions, they enter the workforce. And this brings us to segment 2, the economic landscape.
The shift from the classroom to the economy.
We always hear about the wage gap. It's in the news, it's in HR seminars, it's everywhere.
But Riker completely flips that narrative. He ignores the wage gap and focuses entirely on the death gap.
The death gap. Talk
Yeah.
about that because that sounds ominous.
It's a statistic from OSHA. Men make up 93% of workplace deaths.
93%. So while society debates boardroom diversity quotas, who is actually dying?
Grippers, loggers, oil rig workers, high voltage line mechanics. Riker calls this the glass cellar.
The glass cellar. That is such a powerful image. Everyone is looking up at the glass ceiling.
But nobody looks down at the guys in the basement, keeping the whole structure from collapsing.
And he uses this to point out corporate hypocrisy.
Yes, he paints this vivid picture of corporate activists in comfortable, air-conditioned offices talking about oppression.
While the guy fixing the AC unit, dangling 40 stories up, is taking all the physical risk.
And getting none of the reward. In fact, Riker argues there is a massive redistribution of wealth happening against these men.
This is his pink tax versus the marriage tax argument.
Right. His view is that men work the dangerous jobs, they pay the majority of the taxes, and then that money is funneled into a welfare state.
A welfare state that he claims subsidizes single motherhood and actually incentivizes divorce.
You are taxed to pay for the destruction of your own utility, according to the book. The state becomes the husband, and you become the wallet.
Which leads us directly into what he calls the legal meat grinder. Segment 3, the legal trap.
If you are a guy listening to this and you're thinking about getting married, this is the part of the book that is going to make you sweat.
Riker goes all the way back to the 1970s, the introduction of no-fault divorce.
He describes it as a feminist Trojan horse.
Explain the legal shift there. What actually changed in the 70s?
Before no fault, marriage was a contract where you needed a legally recognized reason to break it. Adultery, abuse, abandonment.
A breach of contract.
Exactly. No fault means one party can end the contract unilaterally for any reason, or frankly, no reason at all.
And usually the other party pays for it. Riker uses the term gynocratic inflation to describe the financial aftermath.
The stats he provides are brutal. Women initiate 80% of divorces.
But men comprise 97% of alimony payers.
It creates a dynamic where he argues marriage is strictly a liability for men.
He uses some really painful case studies to illustrate this. Let's talk about John, the tech founder.
Poor John. This is the classic Riker example. John builds a company. He works 80-hour weeks. His wife cheats on him.
And in the old world, that infidelity would matter in court.
But in the no-fault system, it doesn't. She still took half his assets and gets monthly alimony.
So she is living off the company he built while he's watching his life's work be liquidated to pay her.
Precisely. And then there's Mike, the firefighter. This one was incredibly visceral.
Mike is living in his truck. Right.
Literally sleeping in his vehicle between shifts, while his ex-wife lives in the house he is still paying the mortgage on.
It sounds like indentured servitude.
That's exactly how Riker frames it. You are working to fund a life you are no longer allowed to participate in.
And that exclusion is enforced by the courts, particularly regarding custody. Riker calls it the custody racket.
Because mothers get primary custody 80 to 90% of the time.
Right. He argues the best interests of the child standard is just a legal cover for maternal presumption.
It's used to systematically separate fathers from children. And if the father tries to fight back,
That's where the silver bullet comes in, the false accusation.
in family court, an accusation of abuse, even completely without evidence, just the mere accusation acts as a trump card.
It freezes the father out immediately.
He loses access to the house, the kids, all his legal leverage.
Riker also discusses parental alienation as a specific tactic here.
Yes, where the mother allegedly brainwashes the kids to fear the dad.
It's dark stuff, really dark. But Riker argues this weaponization of accusations isn't just isolated to divorce court.
No, he says it is spilled over into the broader culture. He calls it the false accusation industry.
Which brings us to segment 4. He devotes a significant section to the destruction of due process, particularly in universities.
The Title IX tribunals.
This is where the standard of proof fundamentally changes, right?
Exactly. In a criminal court, you need proof beyond a reasonable doubt. But in a Title IX hearing, it's just a preponderance of evidence.
Which is basically 51% certainty.
It creates a guilty until proven innocent environment for young men.
He brings up the Duke lacrosse scandal as the prototype for this.
A classic case. Lives ruined, media frenzy, expulsions, and it turned out to be a total fabrication.
But the damage was already done. He also mentions Brian Banks, the NFL prospect.
That story is just heartbreaking. Jailed for 5 years for a crime that didn't happen.
His accuser was later recorded admitting she made the whole thing up.
Riker uses these cases to show that the legal system has been weaponized. An accusation alone is enough to entirely nuke a man's career and life.
So you have this climate of fear. You're walking on eggshells at work. You're walking on eggshells in marriage.
And that fear extends right into the modern dating market.
Which Riker calls a war zone.
The data he presents on modern dating is fascinating, but also depressing. He cites Tinder statistics showing that women rate 80% of men as below average.
Wait, think about the math on that for a second. How can 80% of a population be below average? It's statistically impossible.
In the female view of the digital dating market, he argues it is reality. It's hypergamy on steroids.
Hypergamy meaning marrying across or up in status.
Right. Digital dating allows women to compete exclusively for the top tier, the top 20% or even the top 10% of men.
So the vast majority of men, the average guys, are effectively invisible.
Completely invisible. And Riker points out this massive double bind.
The contradiction between what is said and what is done.
Women say they want vulnerable men. They say they want men who open up and share their feelings.
But biologically.
Riker argues they biologically select for stoic, resource-rich providers.
It's the ick factor.
Exactly. The book claims that as soon as a guy cries or shows weakness, the attraction just evaporates.
So it's a trap.
If you fall for the be vulnerable narrative, you lose your sexual market value. But if you don't, you're labeled toxic.
And let's not forget the physical standards. He talks specifically about height discrimination.
One of the last acceptable forms of body shame, according to the text.
He points out the hypocrisy of the body positivity movement for women.
Where every size is beautiful for women, but short men are penalized heavily in both the workplace and the dating market.
So let's just recap the landscape Riker has painted for us here. We've got biological warfare via plastics and soy,
Educational brainwashing via meds, and pathologizing boy behavior.
legal traps waiting in marriage and family court.
And a dating market that thinks you are invisible unless you're 6'2" and rich.
It is a bleak dystopian picture.
Very dystopian.
So what does Riker say we actually do about it? Because segment 5 is all about his solutions.
The red pill renaissance.
Right. And the first step he advocates is pretty radical. It's simply opting out.
MGTOW. Men going their own way.
The marriage strike.
Riker argues that if the contract is rigged, if you sign a marriage license that acts as a deed to your future labor with zero security, the only winning move is not to play.
Do not cohabitate, do not marry.
Period.
But you still have to survive, right? You still have to eat and make a living. You can't just vanish into thin air.
That's where the financial escape plan comes in. Riker advises men to completely avoid the corporate ladder.
Because HR departments and diversity quotas are structurally designed to block you.
He's huge on the trades. Plumbing, welding, construction, electrical work,
Jobs that are essential and hard to outsource.
and generally have way less ideological oversight. You don't have an HR manager watching your microaggressions when you're under a house fixing a burst pipe.
But he also talks a lot about hiding wealth.
He pushes for crypto and building what he calls paper empires.
Assets that are harder for the divorce industry to seize.
He views it as a form of financial counterinsurgency.
It reads like a spy novel at that point, hiding your assets from the gynocracy.
It's a pure survival strategy to him, and it goes hand in hand with physical mastery. We have to circle back to the testosterone issue.
The call to return to hardiness.
Riker wants men to reject the soy agenda entirely.
Yeah.
Stop eating processed garbage.
And lift heavy weights. He specifically contrasts deadlifts with yoga.
Yes, deadlifts specifically. It's about central nervous system stimulation. Heavy compound lifts naturally raise testosterone.
Cold plunges. Eating meat.
It's about rebuilding the biological vitality that he argues the environment is actively trying to strip away. You can't have a strong mind in a chemically castrated body.
And finally, he talks about rebuilding brotherhood.
This is crucial to his rescue mission. He claims male-only spaces have been systematically dismantled or invaded.
The Boy Scouts, the locker rooms, the old men's clubs.
They're all gone or co-ed now, so men need to build their own again.
Digital fortresses, he calls them.
Encrypted networks. Places where men can speak freely without fear of the panopticon.
That feeling that you are constantly being watched and judged by a hostile culture.
It's essentially forming a resistance movement. That is exactly how Riker frames it. He wants men to form tribes again.
So let's zoom out and look at the big picture. What does this all mean? We are looking at a text that is explicitly telling men that the social contract is fundamentally broken.
It's a rescue mission. That is the core takeaway. Riker is telling his readers, no one is coming to save you.
The system is not designed for you anymore.
You have to reclaim your purpose, reject the victimhood narrative completely, and build parallel institutions.
It is really provocative stuff, and it raises a question that Riker leaves us with at the end, which I think is something you really need to chew on. It's kind of an Atlas Shrugged moment.
The ultimate question of participation.
Exactly. If civilization was built on male sacrifice, on men doing the dangerous jobs, taking the massive risks, dying in the wars, protecting the perimeter, what happens when those men just stop?
What happens when the roofer doesn't go up on the roof? What happens when the roughneck doesn't go to the rig?
What happens when men decide the deal just isn't worth it anymore?
Riker suggests we are already seeing the early tremors of this. The labor shortages, the massive drop in male college enrollment.
The lying flat movement.
If the incentives are removed, the production stops. That is the cliffhanger we are all living on right now.
Look, we have covered a ton of ground today, but honestly, we have barely scraped the surface of the data, the case studies, and the deep history in this book.
There's so much more in the actual text.
If this deep dive hooked you, and I know it did, you need the full blueprint. You need to see the sources for yourself.
Absolutely.
Go to Amazon Kindle, go to Google Play Books, and purchase Loneliness for Gen Z. Disconnection from Self, No God, No Church by Conrad Riker. Do it today.
Arm yourself with this information, and if you want to keep up with his ongoing analysis, he is very active online.
Yes, make sure you go follow at Conrad Riker at Substack. That's where the conversation continues in real time.
It is definitely a conversation we need to keep having.
100%. All right, that is it for us today. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to The Deep Dive for more incisive breakdowns like this one. We'll see you next time. Stay sharp.